appeared as if from nowhere. It's a glint of antlers moving through the pine boughs. And I was like, so many thoughts started racing through my head. I was like, oh my God. I was like, it's so thick in here. He's going to disappear. I can hardly see him. I saw a little opening. He was moving fast. I said, I have to stop him or else he's going to be gone into the fir thicket and I'll never see him again.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, episode number 284. Jess Martin, Mainely, Rangeley bucks, and Blauks. Support for the Big Buck Registry and the Deer Hunt Podcast comes from -33 Merino Wool Layering System. Timeless natural insulation, keeping you warm on the coldest days while staying breathable and wicking away moisture on the wet ones. Grizzly Ears, the most advanced engineered wireless earbuds for the outdoors. Covert Scouting Cameras, remote cameras for hunting, wildlife, and security. And Big Buck merch. You can get cool, high-quality Big Buck t-shirts, long-sleeve t-shirts, and hoodies. And show support for this podcast by visiting bigbuckregistrymerch.com. That's bigbuckregistry, MERCH.com. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
This is Brandon Adams with Major League Bowhunter, and you are about to listen to the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Grant Woods from Growing Deer TV. You're listening to my favorite deer hunting podcast, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hi, my name is Joe Donito. I'm one of the Adirondack Trackers, and you're about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow predators. My name is Jay, and thank you for tuning in to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. For Dusty Phillips and Jim Keller and the entire staff here at the Big Buck Registry, welcome to this week's show. There are a couple things I'd like you to do for us if you could. If you would, please check us out on iTunes, subscribe, and leave us a review. With your help, we're going to try and push this show up the iTunes charts. I know we have a lot of listeners out there, and I need you to take some action. I need you to leave a review and subscribe to the show. If you do subscribe, that'll give you access and notification each and every week that a new show is released. You can also access this show in its entirety on YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. It's all right there for you to access on demand at your fingertips. Regarding the harness program, we have an ample supply of harnesses to give away from our volunteer donors. If you're in need of a full body harness, please send an email to j@bigbuckregistry.com. If you were to meet Jess Martin in person, you probably wouldn't instantly think big buck deer killing machine. But make no mistake, Jess is well on her way to making a name for herself as just that. A true hunter and outdoor enthusiast, Jess spends much of her time in the big mountainous woods of Rangeley, Maine. Through tracking and woodsmanship, Jess has figured out how to pattern and chase down the big-bodied Maine bucks, and she shares with us her approach. We'll get to our entire interview with Jess Martin in just one moment, but before we do, let's hear from our friends at -33 Merino Wool Products and Jim Keller with the Deer News. Let's talk about a hunter's layering system for a sec. We need to be ready for any weather that Mother Nature throws at us. With the layering concepts that -33 has created with their incredible merino wool products, they've got you covered. The -33's merino wool expedition weight garments will keep you warm on the coldest late season days while regulating and wicking away moisture in a way that only merino wool can do. You see, wool will absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture without leaving you feeling wet or clammy, and wool insulates better than cotton or polyester and protects against hypothermia on those late season hunts. And here's another interesting point. You might not think of wool for early season, but with the -33 wicking technology, I'll take a lightweight minus 33 base layer any day in warm weather. Merino wool fibers naturally reject any bacteria found in moisture or sweat and gives you double protection against odor as your target buck approaches. Visit www.minus33.com to learn more about Minus 33's layering technology. Use the code BIGBUCK33 to get 10% off your next order.
Now here's Jim Keller with the deer news.
Our first story this week. Missouri Department of Conservation has new rules for deer carcasses in ongoing fight against CWD. This story is from an MDC news release. Starting in 2020, the MDC has added additional regulations to the Wildlife Code of Missouri as part of its ongoing effort to slow down the spread of chronic wasting disease. The new regulations change the requirements for transporting deer carcasses into Missouri and throughout the state, and also add carcass disposal requirements for meat processors and taxidermists. The Missouri Conservation Commission initially approved the changes at its May meeting and gave final approval at its August 23rd meeting in Jefferson City. The changes will become effective February 29th of 2020. The MDC will provide the full regulations in the 2020 Wildlife Code of Missouri and in its 2020 Fall Deer and Turkey Hunting Regulations and Information Booklet, available where permits are sold starting in early July 2020. Most states with CWD have similar restrictions on carcass movement and disposal, said MDC Resource Science Division Chief and deer biologist Jason Sumners. CWD remains a rare disease in our state, and we want to keep it that way. According to MDC, most deer hunters would not be affected by the proposed regulations, and most meat processors and taxidermists are already disposing of deer carcasses. Mule deer, white-tailed deer expand range into Alaska. This story is from the KNBA website and is reported by Claire Strempel. New species of deer are moving into parts of Alaska, including the Upper Lynn Canal. Alaska Department of Fish and Game is gathering information on these ungulates. White-tailed and mule deer are not native to Alaska, but the state's Department of Fish and Game says they're colonizing the 49th state. That's starting in areas proximate to the Canadian border where whitetails and mule deer are known to live. Carl Cook is an area wildlife management biologist in Juneau. He oversees the Upper Lynn Canal Game Management Unit 1D. In May, Cook got a photo that allowed him to identify a mule deer in the Skagway area. According to a Fish and Game publication, mule deer have been seen in Fairbanks and even the North Pole. Cook says the park department has received reports of white-tailed deer near Haines. Smaller Sitka blacktail deer are also common in the area. You can tell who's who by watching their hindquarters. Mule deer have a large white patch on the rump, and the tip of the tail is black. White-tailed deer have broad tails that are white when raised. Both species are bigger than Sitka blacktail deer. It's not unusual for animals to expand their range, but the Department of Fish and Game doesn't know why these deer are migrating or what they're bringing with them. They're concerned deer from Canada may bring in wasting disease or ticks. Since the department is eager to learn more about these populations, it's open season on all mule deer and whitetails. Cook asks that hunters send photographs and samples, which is a nice way of saying big chunks of dead deer. State hunting regulations say you have to call Cook before taking a deer, but he's got an update. He'd rather have hunters go ahead and get the sample than let a deer go because they didn't have a chance to call. The department will return the meat and the antlers. Black-tailed deer are common in southeast Alaska, but there's no hunting season for them in Unit 1D. Their population isn't robust enough to support it, so Cook says to be careful when identifying the white-tailed and mule deer. Turning left, NASCAR bans firearms ads, cites gradual shift on guns. This story is from the Outdoor Hub website. Sorry, NASCAR fans, but this is about to rev your engines. Reports coming to light recently indicate some advertisers are having their ads rejected by NASCAR due to their gun-related material. KVAR, a company known as a premier supplier of high-quality products for the outdoor and shooting sports industries, recently reported in a blog post how their ad was shot down, pun totally intended, by NASCAR due to a gradual shift in their stance on guns. KVAR wasn't the only firearm company to be banned either. The AR-15 manufacturer, Darkstorm Industries, made a post on Instagram to inform their customers that NASCAR had rejected their ads. They even went a little further in the post, calling NASCAR for their gradual shift on guns. This concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. Special thanks to Tim Donzie for leads on stories this week. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
Thanks to Jim Keller for the deer news. Without further ado, here is Jess Martin. Jess Martin, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
Good, I'm doing great.
Excellent. Where's home these days?
Home is Rangeley, Maine, among the western mountains.
For the people that don't know Maine or don't know the Northeast, give us an example relative to Portland, Maine, where that is.
Okay, relative to Portland, Maine, we are more northeast. And when you're looking at a map,
okay,
it's about a 3-hour drive from Portland.
Okay, northeast of Portland, 3-hour drive northeast of Portland.
Correct.
All right. How close to the Canadian border are you?
Oh yeah, we're very close to the Canadian border, and I'm close to the New Hampshire border, actually.
Okay, gotcha. So you're right up there in the corner of Maine, basically. So, and there are spots where, like in Vermont, for example, or New Hampshire, where you could easily go from Maine to New Hampshire to Canada in a triangle, and it sounds like you're in that similar boat. You can go New Hampshire, Canada, Maine, all within a day, no problem.
Absolutely.
Okay, maybe even within an hour or half an hour.
Right.
Right. Very cool. So coming from Maine, we kind of have this predetermined notion of what hunting styles you might be engaged in, but I don't like to take things for granted. So I always like to ask the question, what kind of style of hunting do you do in Maine? Typically, we hear, tracking is in Maine, and I assume that might be one of your techniques. But what's important to you? How do you address the field when you go out?
Well, first thing I like to do right before deer season is get into the woods, start looking for any kind of deer sign, game trails, look for feed. I look for beech nut trees, acorn trees, things like that. And then, up in Maine, we all get excited for that first snow. Once that first snow hits, you can really see where the deer are moving and go from there.
What do you do when there's no snow? Do you freak out, or do you just change your tactics?
When there's no snow, I like to think of past seasons of when there was snow, where deer were moving, and kind of go into those areas. I look for scrape lines, rubs. That seems to be successful, especially hunting previous year's scrape lines, going into that area. And I actually like to do some calling. That's been proven successful for me.
Some calling, okay. So you're not like just a diehard tracker. Like you like to mix up your tactics based off of what is presented to you with the elements.
Absolutely. It all depends on the weather.
Okay.
I usually carry a grunt call and a bleat call. The bleat call tends to be more successful. I've called in a bunch of bucks that way.
The bleat call, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the grunt. Let's get into that in a sec, but let's back up a little bit, and let's go backward in time. How'd you end up in Maine, and how'd you end up in the woods?
Well, I grew up in the Maranacook Lakes region, so more southern compared to Rangeley. I grew up hunting small parcels of private land with my father on my grandfather's farm. He has about 115 acres down there. It was a totally different style of hunting. You can't really do much tracking in those woods because you'll just push the deer right off your property into somebody else's. But I would definitely say what got me into the Maine woods and into the hunting would be my father.
Okay. Then what age did you first step foot in the woods?
From the time I could walk. From the time I could walk, for sure. Before I could even hunt, which the legal age in Maine at the time was 10. My dad would bring me along with him, just teach me how to walk in the woods, how to be quiet, avoid stepping on crunchy leaves or breaking sticks, and, just started teaching me at a young age how to move through the woods, how to be quiet, how to observe.
Gotcha.
Wildlife.
Gotcha. I know a little while back we shared one of your Instagram posts, and it was of a yard. a deer yard, and you don't see this across the country. It's only in areas where you get deep snow. But you're up in the northern hemisphere where deer yard every winter, and I think that was our first introduction to your Instagram page, and it's a lot of things stuck out. Like, you're a true outdoors person. You truly spend a lot of time in the woods, hunting, fighting the elements. When you're talking about snow, how deep does the snow get where you are?
Oh, it gets fairly deep, especially last season. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how many inches we got, but I know during November I was in certain areas was waist deep in snow. It was hard to track in, but definitely knee high.
All right. And is that typical for up there?
It changes each season, but we definitely do get a lot of snow because we're in the mountains.
Gotcha. So let's go back to your hunting techniques. So you break it up between hunting in snow and not hunting in snow. And when you're not hunting in snow, you're in Maine, so there's a lot of timber and lots of places for big bucks to hide. Let's go back to your scouting techniques for an area that's not, I mean, there are big bucks, but they're not as numerous, I would say, as other parts of the country. Where does your scouting begin? And when do you start, and what are you looking for in particular?
My scouting typically begins in the springtime before the summer growth comes up and the woods get too thick to move around in. I go to some of my favorite hunting areas and just hike the woods. I'm looking for the previous season's rubs and scrapes because those will still be visible. I carry GPS with me. I mark these areas, and when hunting season comes along, I go check them out, see if they're active.
Gotcha. So you pre-scout, and then you go back and see if there are deer moving around. And what does it mean? Like, what is it that is an indicator that there are deer here that I need to pay attention to?
The size of the tree that they're rubbing on is a big indicator, and oftentimes I'll put trail cameras out on rubs just to see if something comes to check them out. I've had one camera out for 4 years, and I've got numerous pictures of beautiful bucks checking out those rubs.
Gotcha. So you actually put your cameras on rubs.
Yep, rubs and scrapes as well.
Okay. Any food plots type thing, or do you have any food sources that you key in on?
No.
So it's all like rubs and scrapes. Those are the two things you look at the most.
Yeah, rubs, scrapes, and oftentimes there'll be like a tree that they've used as a licking branch in the past, and I'll face it. I've had them use the same tree multiple years in a row, so I'll just stick a camera up and usually just leave the camera there for the life of the camera. Don't even move it.
Right. And how often do you check cameras?
I leave them out all winter long, check them in the spring. Then I usually check them right before hunting season, a couple weeks into October, I'll go back and check them. So I'm not checking them very often between the spring, summer, and early fall, but I'll check them as I'm hunting during hunting season if I'm moving past that area. But usually they're, a mile into the woods or so from the closest road.
Okay. So you got a ways to go to check a camera.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And as far as the hunting that you're doing, okay, you've got these cameras set up on scrapes and rubs, and they're quite a ways off of the beaten path. What style of hunting are you using before snow flies?
In the area that I like to hunt, there's some migration trails. Well, I call them migration trails, but it's the trails the deer use as they're working their way off the mountain to go towards yarding area with change of season. They use the same trails every year, and I'll start there, usually looking for does, and if you find the does, you find the bucks. That's typically how I start.
So
you're using hunt those areas.
Gotcha. All right. So you've got these trails that they use to yard up and vacate the yards, And so you start following those trails, and wherever those trails lead you based off, and you're still hunting, so you're going slowly. So you're not in a tree stand, I guess is the question. You're on foot.
Yes, hunt by foot. I rarely hunt by tree stand anymore.
Okay. All right. So you're on foot for a vast majority of the time. It sounds like you're looking for the does, and then if you find a doe, you find the bucks, especially at certain times of the year. And do you change it up from month to month, like early season, mid-season, late season? Assuming that late season will bring snow, but if you're talking about like, I don't know, when does your deer season start in Maine?
My season, last year, I believe season opener was October 28th for rifle, was Residence Day. But typically it's somewhere around, the last few days of October, first week of November is rifle opener.
Okay. Any bow hunting for you, or just gun?
I recently started bow hunting. Just a couple years ago, I went and did my archery hunter safety because that's a requirement here in Maine. I've had a bow since I was a kid, but between college and life, never got that archery safety course in. But for the last 2 years, I've been archery hunting.
Okay. But up until the last 2 years, it was pretty much a gun only. Opening day of rifle, that's when you go.
Absolutely.
All right. So you're taking your gun, you're hitting the floor, you're heading out, you're following trails to where you find some more deer, and then trying to find the buck and hopefully catch them before they see you.
Right.
Gotcha. Let's go back to your it's almost like a spot and stock, but it's not. It's a still hunt. Describe your still hunting techniques to me in detail.
All right. So my still hunting techniques, I'm just moving quietly through the woods, take slow steps, try to be quiet, but at the same time, I'm trying to cover ground because like you said, up here in Maine, it can be, few and far between the deer, especially on these mountains.
So do you have a particular indicator of when it's time to move fast and when it's time to move slow?
I hunt with my ears a lot, so if I hear anything, I slow right down.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I slow down. Also, if it just looks like sign as far as there's fresh deer droppings on the ground. If I come across any kind of beds, I'll definitely slow down. And if I'm in an area where I can see further, like get into some hardwoods and it's more open, I'll slow down, make sure I scan the area thoroughly before I progress forward.
Okay. How do you decide where to hunt or where to start your hunt? Do you have a place that you start the same every time, or does it change from day to day?
Definitely changes from day to day.
All right. And how do you decide? Sometimes
it's just a gut feeling. I typically get drawn into places where I've seen deer in the past, where I've had close encounters, and I just can't get my mind off those areas, and I have to get back in and check them out again.
That makes sense. So over the years, you learn good spots and bad spots, right? And it's a lot of times, and I've seen this a lot in New Hampshire too, certain spots at certain time of the year holds certain good bucks, and it happens year in, year out, and probably has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it doesn't change. Do you find that to be the same in Maine?
Absolutely. On the mountains that I hunt, I have a feeling that the bucks will be higher on the mountain earlier in the season. So I tend to hunt at higher elevations early season, first week. I'm hunting higher up, whereas as the season progresses, I'll progress further down the mountain. I don't know if it has to do with once snow falls, they get more snow on top of the mountain that pushes the bucks down, or if it's the rut draws the bucks down to the lower elevations where the does are. But I tend to start higher up.
Interesting. So earlier in the season, during gun season, granted that bow season's even earlier, and it sounds like you're still trying to figure out the bow hunting. But going to the thing that you like the most and seem to be comfortable with is the gun hunting. And that starts later. And it seems like you, and then correct me if I'm wrong, you start high during gun season.
Yep.
And then if and when the snow flies, you'll start to move lower and lower because you feel like the bucks are now not on the top. Now they've moved down into the lower levels of the mountain.
Or at least they venture down for part of the day to make their loops and figure out where the does are.
Okay. Is that like, what time of year does that typically start to happen when you say, okay, now it's time to hunt a lower ground?
2 weeks into November.
Okay.
About, the 14th or the 15th.
Okay. And did somebody teach you that strategy, or is that something you came up with on your own?
Something I came up with on my own.
Okay.
Just through observation.
Gotcha. What was the indicator? Like, when did you start to say, aha? When was that aha moment? Like, okay, now I've got to change. I'm going to stop hunting on top because it seems like they're going lower. What was that day like?
A lot through tracking, just following the sign. I was fortunate the first few years, actually the first year of hunting in this area, to have, a consistent blanket of snow, 2 to 3 inches very frequently, so I could observe fresh tracks almost on a daily basis. And I put a lot of miles on and just took mental note of what was happening. The second year, we didn't get much snow. My third year here, it was, again, consistent snow, so I just made a mental log of what I was observing in this mountain that I was hunting.
Gotcha. Now, if you're like me, that, when we're living in the Northeast, antler size does not determine deer size. In fact, it's often the opposite. Well, not necessarily the opposite, but you're not going to get big antlered bucks in the north like you would further into Ohio, for example.
Right.
When do you have any barometer about when you're going to kill and when you're not going to kill?
It depends on my goal for each particular season. Last year, I had gone a few years without shooting a buck because I had passed on. I had multiple opportunities to shoot a buck. I saw, some 4 points, some 5 points, spike horns, and I had this goal of, shooting an older, mature buck, and I know I was around them, but I never had those encounters. So I went a few years without shooting a buck. Last year, my goal was, if I have a beautiful hunt, something that I feel good about, and it's not as big as a buck, I'm going to, pull that trigger and bring that hunt to an end and have, a conclusion. So it all depends on my goal for that particular year. Last year, I shot a nice 6-point. It was about 160 pounds. And I had a lot of fun cooking it.
Right. That's to each his own, right? That's
right.
The name of the game.
Exactly.
So what's a big buck to you? Like, when do you? What is there a line when you say, okay, that's a big buck?
Right. Well, the gold standard in Maine is 200 pounds. 200 pounds will get you into the Maine Sportsman's Biggest Bucks Club.
Yep.
So that everybody strives for that. I guess the way I notice if it's a big buck or not is usually its chest and its neck. If it's got a fat neck, it's usually a bigger buck.
Right. I'm looking at some pictures on your Instagram page and some trail cam pics you've got, and there's no doubt. I mean, you're not the racks are not big, but the body is significant. Like it's got a big old chest, a big thick neck, very large hindquarters, kind of a drooping, saggy belly. I mean, that's a big, mature Maine buck, but the antlers wouldn't score well anywhere. But it doesn't matter because it's a big buck. You're trying to catch the biggest fish in the stream. Doesn't matter, what it's like relative to other streams in the country, right?
Right.
Gotcha. So I'm getting a picture of kind of how you approach all this stuff. And so let's say the season rolls on and the snow comes. Does that change your style of hunting at that point?
Once the snow flies, my style of hunting definitely changes. I am looking to catch a nice buck track. I've always had a goal of, tracking a Maine buck and having a successful hunt that way.
Gotcha.
So I pick up a track, I move, steady until I see signs that, the deer, that I'm approaching it, whether it be that he's feeding or he's, getting ready. That's a sign that it's my understanding that he's getting ready to bed.
Okay. All right. So you're reading the track.
Right.
Gotcha. All right. And based off of certain indicators will determine what that deer is about to do.
Correct.
And so describe to me, like, what does it look like when that buck's on the move?
Oh, when they're on the move, they're just making steady. They're just moving steady. They're going in a straight line. They're not making lots of, turns or zigzags in the snow. They have a place to be and they're looking for it.
All right. And when you see that change, what's the change look like, and what happens in your approach? Do you speed up, slow down? What changes your approach at that very moment? Like, if the deer's going straight ahead, are you moving along? And then if you start to see a zigzag, what happens to you?
So when I notice that they're starting to zigzag, feed, it means that they're looking for something in that particular area, whether it be a place to bed, place to eat, or even they smell a doe. I slow right down.
Okay.
At that point, basically start to still hunt, take a few steps, scan the area, take another few steps, scan the area. If I catch a glimpse of a deer, I slow right down, study it. Last year, what happened for me, which ended up being successful, I was tracking a buck. I got a glimpse of him. He was that 6-point that I was talking about, and I had that moment like, okay, I'm going to hold off. I let him go. 15 minutes later, I decided to use the bleat call. So I called. It brought another opportunity. He came charging right back in, and at that point, I shot him.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's hard to pass up those opportunities, right? Okay, you saw
right.
this, and then you did an interaction like a turkey hunting almost, where, okay, now they're coming. This is a good hunt. I got to do something about this.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, gotcha. So when do you call it quits? When does the season end?
For me, the rifle season usually ends the last week of November, but then we get 2 weeks of muzzleloader season. And if I have not filled my tag, I have a muzzleloader and I will get right back out there. So I follow it right through to the end.
Okay, gotcha. And is your goal to tag one deer?
Tag one deer, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
I have been looking into getting a New Hampshire license because in New Hampshire you can hunt on Sundays.
Right.
Maine you can't. So with it being just 30 minutes away, I've been thinking about going that route.
Do you think Maine will ever change those laws?
I've heard talk of it, but I'm not sure. There's a lot of people who are for hunting on Sundays, but you still have that opposition. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
It is a funny rule, though, isn't it? I mean, it goes back a long time ago. They call them the blue hair laws. And different states are the same. Same thing about buying alcohol on Sunday before noon. There are these little funny nuances that date back quite a ways that just haven't been changed yet. And they have become steadfast in some of the culture, in a sense, and in the legislature. They just won't change as quickly as you think it would. It's a modern age, but boy, some of the politicians drag their heels and put their foot down and say, okay, no, we're not changing it. What's your opinion? Would you prefer to have Sunday hunting in Maine? I
would love to hunt on Sundays, especially because I love to hunt with my father, and he works Monday through Friday, so that basically puts him 4 days a season, which he can hunt, those 4 Saturdays.
Yep.
If we had Sundays, it doubles the amount of opportunity he'd be able to go hunting with me. So
right, that makes sense.
Yep.
So you've during your hunt, and it sounds like you had mentioned, you're getting into the bow hunting a little bit more. And talking about the gun hunting stuff, what gear are you using? What gear are you bringing with you on these hunts?
For bow hunting?
Well, let's go right to gun hunting. We'll get to the bow hunting in a sec because I have a specific question about bow hunting for you. But
okay.
As far as your gun hunting, gun season starts a certain day. What gear are you bringing into your woods early, and then does it change throughout the season?
The gear that I'm bringing with me is I never leave without my phone because I use that hunting application, the Onyx Maps.
Yep.
That has increased my confidence level to, explore and go further
right.
than before. I also bring my deer call, which is a dual call. It's the grunt and the bleat. Let's see. Oh, I always bring a pen.
Okay, yep.
A piece of paper and a Ziploc baggie and electrical tape. So those are for if I'm successful, I can legally put the transport tag on my deer. And because it's oftentimes in the snow, I put it in the Ziploc baggie and electrical tape
right.
secures it to the deer.
Right.
I always have that with me. I always have a knife for gutting. Let's see. I carry a pack with water, and those are the essentials. I always have those. Sometimes I'll bring a snack because I'm out there most of the day. But otherwise, that's it. I try to be pretty light so I can move on my feet.
Not get bogged down. And that's kind of the classic still hunter tracker kind of mentality, right? Try to stay light. You're going to be moving. Your body heat's going to generate the warmth. Not want to get weighed down with a big pack, and so you can move all day.
Right.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Of course, I'm from New England, but that makes sense to me. So let's go to the bow hunting. I know this is kind of a new adventure for you. You said you started a couple of years ago, but you've been shooting a bow your whole life. What changed? What made you decide that I should try this bow hunting thing too?
Having more free time after college, opened up a lot more time for hunting for me. And it opened up that month of October, to, get into the woods for deer season. It's something I now like to do. I like to bear hunt, with a bow. Nice. I don't really know what the driving factor was other than just more opportunity to be outdoors hunting.
Gotcha. Where'd you go to college?
Oh, I went to University of Maine at Farmington and University of Maine Fort Kent.
Gotcha. Very cool. So it really just, you had more free time basically, right? And you can get outside and get out and hunt a little bit more than you had before.
Yes, absolutely. I actually work as a nurse, so I think nursing is the greatest profession for hunting because you can work 3 12-hour shifts, have your full-time hours in, and then have 4 days to be out in the woods.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. It's actually a good schedule. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as the bow season starts, and it looks like you had a decent season bear hunting already, right? I mean, when did your bear season start?
Bow season starts, I think last year it started September 28th and went straight through to the end of October.
Okay. Gotcha. And what about your bear bow season, or when did your bear season start?
Bear season started August 26th this year.
All right. And tell me about your bear hunt.
Oh, that was pretty exciting. So this year we looked into Maine's public lands and learned that they offered a public land bear hunt. You have to apply for bear sites, and it's a lottery system. I happened to draw a site with my father. You can have 2 people on the site. We bear baited with apples and trail mix, like almonds and pretzels and stuff like that. And it was very exciting. I had to practice. I knew that if I was going to hunt a bear and if I was going to do it with my bow. I needed to be responsible about it, and I needed to make sure I could take an ethical shot. So I learned, where the vitals are on a bear. I practiced shooting from a seated position because I knew I'd be in a tree stand. I had my bow checked out. I drove over to LL Cody's to have them, assess my bow, make sure there was nothing wrong with it, make sure I didn't need a new string, that kind of thing. Made sure I had appropriate broadheads, appropriate arrows, and just tried to make sure that I had every confidence in both myself and my equipment before drawing back on a bear. And, it all came together, and it happened opening day, 6:45 p.m. Nice black bear came out from between some pine boughs, and I had to wait, and it felt like forever for that bear to give me an appropriate shot. They have to have that front leg forward, or else the leg bones will block, the heart and the lungs. So it took a lot of patience, but it all came together.
Very cool. Congratulations. That's really neat. So you're going to try to carry this over into the deer season, I would assume.
Oh, absolutely. Carry that momentum right over.
Right. That's neat. So you've killed some good Maine bucks over the years. Is there any that sticks out more than the next?
Absolutely. I would, the first buck that comes to mind would be my one I like to call Rangeley Ridge Runner. We always have the tradition of naming our bucks. Some people do it, some people don't, but we like to do it so that, as a, family and hunting friends, we all know, which buck we're talking about. But the Rangeley Ridge Runner buck was one that was very special to me because after years of being away at college and just not having time to hunt, I finally had the opportunity to hunt with my father. And I had just moved to Rangeley. It was my second season ever hunting in Rangeley. And he was actually had the time to take a week off, hunt that third week in November with me. And for the first time in our hunting relationship, he was relying on me to come up with the plan and pick where we were going. That made me really nervous.
Right.
But I had tracked a buck a year before into this area, and I just could not get this area out of my mind. I had, dreamed of it all winter long, all spring, all summer. I was like, I need to get back into this area. And the buck had brought me by some fresh scrapes. I saw some does feeding in an old cut, and it was just this rocky ridge line. It just seemed like a natural corridor for deer to move, and I just could not get that out of my head. So anyway, this next year I brought my father to that area. The only difference was it was exceptionally hot and dry, no snow. Every step was harsh. It was crunchy. There was no wind that day that we went out, so it's just like you could hear everything in the woods. So we each went our separate way. I started heading up trying to find that corridor that I'd been through the year before, and I was, just super frustrated. There was raspberry bushes and whippets and just everything grabbing at me and, making noise. I was sweating. I had way too many clothes on. So I'm working my way up the mountain, and I finally break through the raspberry bushes, and I decide, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to shed some layers, kind of reset my mind, brush off the frustrations of the morning, and just take a minute. As I'm tying my jacket around my waist, there's this white rabbit that jumps by me and it disappears. And I'm like, oh, that was kind of cool. I decide to go stand on a boulder, cool off a little bit, and I'm standing there looking into the mess I just climbed out of, trying to relax. And then about 15 minutes passes, and I see that white rabbit jumping right back at me. And I'm like, that's weird. But that's right as I, noticed that, I heard the sound of, sounded like a, deer moving atop the dry ground. And that's when, my heart started racing. I started, looking into the thick mess. Saw, appeared as if from nowhere, a glint of antlers moving through the pine boughs. And I was like, so many thoughts started racing through my head. I was like, oh my God. I was like, it's so thick in here. He's going to disappear. I can hardly see him. I saw a little opening. He was moving fast. I said, I have to stop him or else he's going to be gone into the fir thicket and I'll never see him again. So I grunted at him, no grunt call at that time. I just, grunted best I could with my mouth, and he stopped. He stopped just short of the opening, but I could see his antlers through the pine boughs, and there was a small opening in which I could see, right behind his front leg. So that's all I needed. I raised my gun, took my shot, and then I just see the big white belly go tumbling down the mountain, and he disappeared. It was pretty steep where I was, so it was just one roll and he was gone. And I was like, wow, my hands were shaking. I grabbed my radio from my pocket and, called to my dad and my significant other, Cooper, said, I'm going to need some help. I just shot a buck. And they immediately were asking me, how big? And I said, I don't know. I just saw antlers. And at that time, I was just going for any legal buck, It was going to be my first Rangeley buck, so any legal buck. And so they had no idea, I had no idea. I didn't see the buck fully. I just knew I could see enough to make a good shot and that it was a legal buck. So as I wait for them to make their way to me, which felt like forever, I thought I could smell him. I was like, I smell the buck. Where is he? So I worked my way down to where he had been standing when I shot, and I couldn't find any blood. But I could see the ground torn up from when he had rolled. So I just meticulously start scanning. I don't see anything, but I can smell him. He's got to be right there. Started thinking maybe I was imagining it, but then my father showed up first from above me. And as he's approaching, he's like, I smell it, Jess. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness I'm not making it up. It actually is that,
right.
Rutting buck. But so together we start looking for blood. We're not seeing anything, but it's so thick where we are. It's just a thick mess of fir trees and blowdowns and, I call them whippets, but they're like the little, grown up, little tiny trees that are growing up.
Yep.
But then my significant other, Coop, comes and he's like, okay, you guys aren't getting anywhere. I'm going to climb this tree and see if I can, see anything. So as he's climbing the tree, I just hear him go, wow. And when I look up at him, he's pointing at the ground into the fir thicket. And he's like, it's right there. And he guides me from above. I'm just crawling through, these pine boughs, pushing my way through. And when I saw the deer for the first time, I was shocked. I was amazed. He was just beautiful, 10-point buck. He looked massive to me because it was, one of my first encounters with a buck like that. He was just beautiful. Just started admiring him right away and yelled to my father, he's giant, get in here. He ended up weighing 115 pounds field dress, so it did get me into that Big Bucks Club, which was exciting. It was, my father wasn't in it at that time, so I got to joke with him about that and all the nervousness about, bringing my dad on a hunt and it being a dry day and, all that went out the window.
That's awesome. So you got to kind of rub it in your dad for a little while that you were in the Big Buck Club and he wasn't.
Right, exactly.
That's beautiful. What year was that?
That was 2015.
Okay.
Yep.
Very nice. So I had a couple questions for you before I get into the 10 rapid fire questions. Looks like you're familiar with the product called chaga. On your Instagram page, you had a big old chunk of chaga that looks like you harvested. Do you use chaga?
Yeah, we make tea out of it.
Gotcha. Is it something that you is kind of common for your area where it's almost part of the culture, or is it just something you're aware of?
Just something that I'm aware of. I know there's a few people who like to go out in the woods and collect it, but I don't see a real force of people who really know about it.
Okay.
But I know I like to make tea from it. I think it tastes delicious.
Supposedly, there's lots and lots of health benefits to it. I don't know if you've ever researched it, but there's some fascinating articles that you can read about where it's been politically and militarily under lock and key, top secret stuff in Russia before. It's a fascinating read about chaga, and just so happens that it grows extremely well in Maine and New Hampshire.
Yeah, I see quite a bit of it actually.
Yep, yeah, I do too. It's kind of, to me, it's like the ginseng to the south is what chaga is to the north.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, very interesting stuff. And notice that your license plate is Maine Blauks. Tell me about that.
Oh yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. I have an hour-long commute to work, so for 6 hours a week I'm just driving. So I don't have cell service on the drive, so I download podcasts, and that's comes from the Meat Eater podcast. They like to joke around and say, instead of saying bang, when people are traditionally telling their hunting stories, they'll say, oh, and then I saw the deer and bang, I shot it. But one of the hosts from that podcast is Lafnian, and I guess in their culture, they'll say Blauks instead. So my dad and I started using that, just joking around, because he listens to podcasts as well, and then we get together and we talk about them. So kind of as a joke, I put that as my license plate, and when I pulled up to his house for the first time, he just busted out laughing.
Blauks. And how do you say it again? Blauks?
Blauks.
Blauks. That's really cool. That's
Yep.
pretty funny. So you're all in. Sounds like this, when you're not driving back and forth to your nursing job, you're in the woods.
Absolutely, yeah. I love. I'm always planning my next fishing trip or hunting trip. If I'm not participating in a fishing trip or hunting trip, I'm planning one. People say I'm a little obsessed, but it's what I like to do.
That's funny. Very cool. Let me hit you with 10 rapid fire questions here.
Sure.
All right. What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
My number one hunting tip of all time would be plan on being successful. I see time and time again, people, especially new hunters, they'll get a deer or a bear or something, and they'll have it on the ground and then, not know what to do. If you butcher an animal yourself, it takes me like 10 to 15 hours to really get everything done. And if you're not going to do it yourself, you have to know where you're going to take it and who's going to take care of it for you. So I'd say, just plan on being successful, because the hunt doesn't end with the kill.
Gotcha. Okay. If we all have these things that we bring into the woods and it drives us crazy if we don't have it with us, what's that one thing for you?
That would be my GPS, which I use my phone. I need that with me, because if I don't have that with me, I lack confidence, especially if I'm tracking a buck, because it can bring me into a new area. And if I don't know that area and I'm not confident, I won't be hunting correctly. So I need my GPS.
Gotcha. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
My biggest pet peeve in life is lack of accountability, like and ownership for one's actions. Like if somebody doesn't step up and take ownership for their actions, I guess that kind of drives me a little nuts.
Yeah, gotcha. No, I like that one. And how old are you today?
How old am I? I'm 29.
29. All right. So you're 29 years old. What would you tell the 16-year-old Jess Martin, knowing what you know today about life?
I would say go get your archery hunter's safety before you get too busy.
I like that answer. That catches a lot of people off guard when you're like, wait a minute, I got to have a hunter's safety for archery too. Because back in my day, you didn't need it when you started it. You just had to sign up and away you went. You meet a stranger in a hotel lobby at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and they ask you what you do for a living. What do you tell them?
I tell them that I am a registered nurse and that I work in an acute care setting, and that I love it.
Gotcha. Very cool. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a maple bear sausage that I made myself with maple syrup that was gathered in Rangeley.
Wow. It's all Maine, right? That's an all Maine breakfast right there. Beautiful. You get your own billboard on the side of a highway. It's a blank canvas. You can put anything you want on it. What would it say?
Oh, man, that's a tough one. I think it would be, hunt to live, or hunt, something to do with hunting, obviously, because that's my obsession in life.
Gotcha.
Like hunt to live, I guess.
Nice. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
I would say, I'd say my father. He's just, a successful outdoorsman. He does wildlife art as a hobby, and he's very good at it. He's a successful taxidermist, so I would, think of him.
Yep, very nice. What's a typical day in your life look like?
Typical day. So, I work nights. So if it's a work day, I usually go to bed around 10 a.m., wake up at 5:30 p.m. and stay up all night and go to bed. But if it's a non-work day, it depends on what season it is. I'm either hunting or fishing or planning.
Very nice. All right, and then what's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like?
Typical deer hunting day. Wake up before dark or before sunrise, make a quick breakfast, grab my pack, get in my truck, drive to the nearest hunting area and logging roads, and head for the woods until I pick up a track or sign. Or I usually hunt until lunch time, take a little break, and then hunt till dark.
Very, very
cool. Come back and tell the stories.
Nice. Excellent. So if we've created more questions than answers, sometimes we do, if people just want to check you out online, see what you're up to. I know you have a blog and you have a cool Instagram page, and you're frequently updating it with new content of your latest and greatest hunts and outdoor adventures. Where can we find more information about you? Yeah, people can find me at the Great North Woods on Instagram. Is what that's my tag. And if they want to find my blog, it's thegreatnorthwoods.blog, and they'll find me. Very cool. Well, Jess, I got to tell you, this has been an absolute blast. I like learning about hunters from all across the country, and Maine is always an intriguing place for me because it's like where I live, but on steroids where you are, because it's deeper and hardier and deeper into the woods and rougher, and you have to be almost a good survivalist to live in northern Maine in that sense. So I appreciate where you live. I appreciate the things you're doing. I really like that you're living with us a lot of your life and putting it on social media so we can kind of see what life in the North Woods of Maine is like, and bringing us on your adventures. And it's just been an honor to have you on our show. Thank you, Jay. I appreciate it. I've had a blast as well. I always love the opportunity to talk hunting and talk Maine and talk, the Great North Woods. It's always interesting to talk to some of the younger people that are getting into this industry and seeing what they're doing. Maine is certainly one of those rough terrain areas where it's very mountainous, very wooded. You got to hike. Jess is getting it done. She's learned how to hunt the big Maine bucks, and she's just getting started. I think we're going to hear a lot more from Jess. It's just very refreshing to see young people continuing to get into this industry and promote hunting on her social media page and just point blank enjoying the outdoors. So best of luck to Jess. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice. Let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, and as an Amazon Alexa skill. Go to Alexa and say, Alexa, enable Big Buck Registry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.